everybody. My name is Lisa Snyder. I am the founder and co-creator of Tokeativity, the global cannabis community for women. Our intention is to nurture a safe space for women to connect, learn, and to create. We work to empower women at the root level and for the normalization of cannabis. I'm really excited to have a very special guest with us today, Erica Winters from Everbloom Consulting. She is going to teach us a bunch of things about cannabis horticulture. And today we're going to be talking about pests of the Pacific Northwest. I'm really excited that I found Erica through Women Leaders in Cannabis down in Eugene on a visit that I went down there. And I discovered that she consults with lots of different people on cannabis. And it's been really interesting to try to find women who feel excited and comfortable about talking about these things and sharing this kind of information. So Erica, welcome to the classroom. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lisa. My pleasure.
Do you want to tell us, actually, let me read your bio here. A little bit about Erica. Erica is the owner of Everbloom Consulting. She's been digging up soil success for over 22 years. That's a long time to be doing this. Specializing in organics, she spent over 10 years consulting school gardens, urban farms, and both home and commercial gardens and farms. 2 decades of hands-on experience in further fertilized with certificates in horticulture therapy, master gardener, school gardener coordination, and soil stewardship. Wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. From cucumbers to cannabis, Erica loves to grow with her community, farming, consulting, and educating out of rural Lane County down near Eugene, Oregon. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so excited to learn from you.
Lisa, thank you. Thank you for creating this space.
Absolutely. Let's get your PowerPoint up here, and I'm going to hand it on over. There you go.
All right, ladies, thank you. Thank you for creating a safe space. And I'm so excited today to talk about the cannabis and hemp pests of the Pacific Northwest. If there's one thing I love to nerd out on, it is bugs. So today we're going to dive really deep into diagnostics, how to identify a pest, what the most common pests are, and we're going to talk about integrated pest management mapping. So we'll cover a lot. I want to start by briefly discussing the Oregon Department of Agriculture's guidelist. We'll do a very, very quick overview on the most common pests we see in cannabis gardens. And then I really want to focus on the newer invasives, the new bugs that we've been seeing in our territory, including root aphids, the bong aphid, and micromites, which includes russet mites, broad mites, and gall mites. Then we'll talk a little bit about the progression of micromites symptoms, what you'll see on your cannabis plants in veg versus flower. And then we'll look into some diagnostic tools and techniques. I also want to introduce integrated pest management. This is the foundation of everything I do with my clients. And we'll talk a little bit about my IPM plan for micromites and specifically for root aphids. And then we'll conclude this session talking about the importance of industry safety and, of course, sustainability when it comes to regenerative farming. So that ODA guide list, this is pretty much our shopping list, right? If you make a product in Oregon for pest control, you want to be on this list. So it's a really good guide, and there's a lot of great registered pesticide products, both for insects and milts and mildews. And it's an extensive list that continually gets updated. Thank you, ODA. And I do like to just mention, as you're going through this list, remember that there is a bit of a catch-22. So most of the products that are on this list are not specifically labeled for use on cannabis. There's the catch-22. The law basically says that unless a pesticide product is specifically labeled for use on that intended crop, it may not be legally used. So we're all operating in the gray area here. So grain of salt. So most of us are pretty familiar with the most common pests here in the Pacific Northwest. We generally have these fungus gnats that fly out of the soil. They typically don't cause a lot of problems to healthy plants. The time that it is a concern is if you have a very young clone or seedling that is very susceptible, hasn't yet established, and is growing indoors in an artificial environment. Those are really easy to manage. Spider mites, they're a little trickier. They have a really quick life cycle, right? Every 3 days in warm indoor environments, they're popping out a whole nother generation. Most of the techniques I'm going to teach you today about micromites will also apply to spider mites. Many of us have also dealt with thrips. Thrips are not too big of a deal. It's pretty easy to get on top of that as long as you're treating the foliage as well as the soil. Their life cycle plays out in some very, very interesting ways. So if you're not interrupting that larval stage in the soil and you're just treating the foliage of your canopy, you'll end up continuing this cycle. So I want to help teach you a little bit about IPM so you can break that. And then outdoors and indoors, we see caterpillars, loopers, budworms. Typically late season outdoors, we see those nasty little worms and they poop in our flowers, and it's not fun for medicinal value of the final product. Those can be a little bit harder to manage as well. When you see those white moths flying around our valley, those are not necessarily our friends. Those are rarely pollinators. Those are generally speaking the adult version of the larval stage that will eat your flower buds. We are going to dive in pretty deep with root aphids today. They are fairly common. They first emerged on the scene about 5 years ago was when I did my first identification. And then I saw a very, very sharp decline in their population, but they're back on the rise. We can't rest on our laurels. And I also want to cover a little bit about fungal and bacterial pathogens. This is a pest-specific workshop today, but I'm sure all of us are familiar with powdery mildew and botrytis. And working with some really, really cutting-edge analytical labs, I'm now able to qualify newer pathogens like Rhizoctonia and Fusarium. So having that data has been so valuable for our work. If we don't know what it is, we don't necessarily know the proper treatment protocols. So these newer invasive Pacific Northwest pests, again, I've been working with some wonderful labs where we're able to actually qualify and quantify the pathogen load both in the soil and in plant tissue. So again, this is really opening the door to the research and the data that we need to make good decisions in the garden. I'll talk briefly towards the end about viruses. The world of viruses it's just so complex. The scientific community around the world still has so much to learn. And they typically are not something that you can get rid of. It's kind of like cold sores in human beings, right? It's something you just end up living with. And as we know, when we're stressed, we become more susceptible. So the most important thing I'm going to talk about today in integrated pest management is keeping your garden happy to prevent these very problems. We may touch a little bit on this bong aphid, B-H-A-N-G, bong aphid. So in the lower right-hand corner here, you'll see the Oregon Department of Agriculture info sheet. You can get that on their website. This is not your typical garden variety aphid you'd find on your roses or your brassicas. The population explosion is what makes this so hard to combat. They give live birth to pregnant daughters. It's just insane. I can't even believe how quickly these populations can get out of control. So we are working with some new biological and organic chemical treatments as well for IPM on that. What I really want to focus on this session is what I call micromites. So that word was coined, I'd like to think, in Eugene, Oregon about 4 years ago. The deal is we're still learning so much about classification, right? What is this bug? So as far as the entomological community goes, they're naming these pests based on the hosts that they target, right? So there's a tomato russet mite, and that's Aculops lycopiraceae. And that means that genus feeds on that plant. And interestingly, the russet mite was actually renamed a couple of years ago. There's a now identified hemp russet mite, Aculops cannabicola. So this is a confirmed pest, and in my opinion, this is one of the largest threats to cannabis cultivation. It's a really big deal. And because we're learning so much about the classifications of each of these pests, I do just like to use the word micromites. It's a nice broad umbrella, and that does include the russet mite, also known as the rust mite. We'll see some symptoms later on that has given it that title. There's also a pest called the broad mite, and then in that same family as the broad, cyclamen and gall mites. Really big problem, and I am seeing them in about 60% of my clients' farms. So this is really concerning. You want to go on an adventure? So let's dive deep down the rabbit hole for the adventures in micromites that we're all battling here in Oregon. So there's two families that we're grouping the micromites within. So there's the Tarsinomidae family, and that is home to the broad and cyclamen or gall mites. And the grape industry has been dealing with this for many, many years. So fortunately, we do have some information there on gall mites. And then the Areophyid family is home to the dreaded russet mite. And there are some life cycle differences. There are very distinct morphological differences. So what the egg looks like, what the larvae looks like, what the adult looks like. So we can get a little deeper into identification. So right here, we're looking at the russet mite. I like to describe that as a tapered tan-colored carrot. They look like maggots under the microscope. It's stomach turning. And then up above here, we're looking at the cyclamen mite. Again, that's in the Tarsinomidae family. So a little bit of Latin for you. But what's really, really important here is to start learning the signs, right? So in the lower left here, this is actually an astronomical population of russet mites. This is only at 60 times magnification. So I call this the sawdust effect. It literally looks like sawdust is coating your stems and the tops of your leaves. And what that sawdust is a dog pile of russet mite on top of russet mite on top of russet mite. And in my opinion, that is not treatable. You want to burn, compost, or destroy plant material that has a population load that high. Now over to the right here, we're looking at a pair of broad mites at 100 times magnification, just to give you a sense of how small they are. And this is why it has become such a problem, is because we're not looking closer, right? We're used to spider mites, thrips, caterpillars, macro pests that we can see with our very own eyes. This requires us to look a little closer. I love this photo. So I was walking by a canopy, and you'll notice this tacoing leaf. And between the leaflets of her 7 fingers on her palmately compound leaf, I swear she was flipping me the bird, right? So I got a little closer. I definitely saw some early warning signs of micromites. One of those signs is early pistil degradation. So if it is July or August, early September, and you're starting to see browning on the pistil tips, those little beautiful hairs, that could be a sign that they're nibbling down on them. But this is one of my most alarming signs, right? So leaf contortions, tacoing, canoeing, twisting, contorting, these are mutations that are occurring. And myself and my colleagues are starting to theorize that as these micromites are taking bites out of your beautiful, luscious girls, they're injecting a toxin through their style into the leaf, and that makes it more malleable so that they can digest it. But there is some mounting evidence that that toxin is potentially responsible for those leaf distortions. So this is a really, really good sign. Yeah, that was night and day. So I got my 100 times magnifier out, and after 2 hours under the microscope, I was able to identify an adult. This is literally looking for a needle in a haystack when you have a very early infestation. So again, we have this contortion, right? We have this mutation. I like to call this symptom sickling, like the farm tool, the sickle. Very emblematic of what we're seeing here. So this would be very early onset. This is when you want to catch it. This is when it's treatable. As those symptoms start to progress, I'm also noticing a collateral symptom potentially caused by another pathogen, a virus. So you may note in this picture, not only do we have the sickling, but we have the very early start to some mosaic-like symptoms. And this is a really big issue. Again, we don't have cures for viruses. The best we can do is boost health and suppress it, right? So as things start to continue, they get ugly. So this is where the russet mite or the rust mite gets its name. So this is a really good depiction of the progression, right? And so these are different leaves from different canopy layers of an infected plant. So we start to see interveinal russeting, and we start to see leaf necrosis or die off. You'll also notice that the leaf margins, these jagged serrations, start to get sharper. That's a really interesting sign. They're literally nibbling on those leaf margins and changing the shape. And then as things continue, you don't have any chlorophyll left in this leaf. It's no longer a solar panel for photosynthesis. So you can imagine how much this type of pest can slow down growth rates. And really concerning are these viruses that I'm now able to confirm with in-state labs. So we have confirmed cannabis cryptic virus, hemp streak virus, cucumber mosaic virus, and I haven't had a case yet in Oregon, but we have had a case of raspberry dwarf virus down in California. And I'm really grateful to MJ Diagnostics and Microterra Lab for stepping up our game in the science world and giving us real data that we can count on. So unfortunately, half of my conversations with most of my clients revolves around pointing fingers. Where did they come from, right? The conspiracy theories abound, you guys. It's wild. And I'm not one to feed the fire of rumors. I think that there's value in theories, but I feel like it's really important that we have solid information before we share it. There's a lot of stuff going around social media. On these bullet points, you'll see some of the conspiracy theories that are going around the community. And in my opinion, this is not going to cure the problem, right? It might be great to vent and talk to your friends and kind of go down the rabbit hole on different theories. But in my opinion, we need to focus on the cure. So when we're looking under that microscope together, I also have a lot of clients really curious to identify the pest down to the genus species. And that's great because we know if we're dealing with a russet mite or a broad mite or a gall mite, and that can be helpful for understanding the life cycle of the pests. Now, it is true at 60 times magnification, these little guys can resemble trichomes. Glandular trichomes are stalkless trichomes, right? So the lollipop stick is not there and you've just got that beautiful shining orb of cannabinoid and terpene essential oils. That can give us a false positive. So one thing I'm really clear with my clients about is I will not make a positive ID unless I see an active adult or larvae present and moving around. And one thing to note as you're looking closer, if you're doing any kind of pest sprays and you spray on a Monday and then you go to inspect your leaves under the microscope on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, if your pest product worked, you've desiccated that pest. It's hard enough to find one of these micromites at this magnification, but if you have shrunk it and desiccated it, and now it's just this unidentifiable blob, I can't give you a positive ID. So it gets really precarious when it comes to identification. If you have an active pest issue, I'm not going to tell you to stop spraying what's working for you. However, we really need to look closer to resolve the problem. So, when it comes to the eggs, again, this can resemble your glandular trichomes. So it gets really tough in flower when you're digging through a forest of trichomes. Now, I will say the broadmite egg is much more identifiable, and that can help steer the ship. But again, my treatment protocols are going to be the same for broadmites, russet mites, and gall mites, and they're all responding to the treatments fairly well. We are going to talk about resistance to pesticides here towards the end, but it really is my belief that we need to be focusing on the solutions, not the problems. Generally speaking, the treatments are going to be the same, and none of us have time to waste. So let's move forward on how to treat the problem. So let's fill your tool bag. I want to make sure you feel ready and loaded and like you have everything you need to first and foremost identify this problem. So you want to create an observation station. And ideally, this would be quarantined in a separate space where you're not actively growing. Really important cross-contamination protocols. If you're bringing infected plant material from one zone to another, you just contaminated that zone potentially. So I like to use a plastic tote. You may have a dedicated space. A lot of farmers do have a quarantine room. And so if you have good lighting in there, just set up a little plastic tote so that it's contained, something with a lid, and you can bring the material in that sealed package while you're doing your investigations. So to collect these little guys, you might want a jar or a Ziploc bag. You could use slides, microscope slides. I will say that the dissecting microscopes are very expensive and they can be a little bit unuser-friendly for beginners. So I really like a small hand lens. Now, most of our grow stores across the state do sell iPhone microscopes or smartphone microscopes. You just clip this little guy over your camera and you can zoom in and you can take pictures and you can take videos, and now you have data for your files. So make sure you have a microscope that you're comfortable working with. And again, I wouldn't use anything less than 40 times magnification, but to really, really zoom in, I would recommend 100. 500 is insane. To actually see their little appendages wiggling around is kind of scary, but you don't necessarily need to go that deep. One trick I found to really help with identification, I noticed that a lot of pests are sensitive to intense UV light. So if I've got my LED light overhead, they're scurrying out of the field of view. So a little trick I learned from master gardeners is take that sample in your collection bag and put it in the fridge. 5 minutes will do you just fine. Remember, pests and all life typically are pretty temperature sensitive. So if it's a really, really hot day, they're really, really active and they're eating a lot because their metabolism is just off the charts. If you slow them down, you'll have a better opportunity at catching a good view and getting that picture. Other tools that you might want to have on hand, or at least check off your list that they are in stock, hand sprayer, a 360-degree hand sprayer, something that will get the undersides of the leaves, the upper sides of the leaves, and we want a really fine mist. If you have very large water droplets, they tend to bead and run off the canopy rather than stay where you want them. And for our commercial producers, I hope you have an atomizer. These are wonderful, high-powered motorized sprayers that put off a beautiful fine mist. Some folks use paint sprayers or backpack sprayers. You just want to look at the micron rating. Microns will tell you just how fine that mist will be. And again, we're looking for as fine as you can get. I also like to set up a dunking station. We're going to talk about heat treatments later on, and there is a way to use hot water instead of expensive chemical or organic pesticides to resolve these issues. And when we get into IPM, you are going to want to have some tools on your shelf, as far as sprays go. So I'm not going to make specific product recommendations. That's not in my business model. But what I would like to share with you is some ingredients in different products on the market that have been really effective. And again, your compass is the ODA guide list for what you're allowed to use on cannabis plants here in Oregon. And last but not least, don't forget a wetting agent. So there's a lot of different wetting agents on the market. My favorite one is yucca. It's a plant-derived extract, and yucca has this amazing ability to boost plant immune response. That's called SAR, S-A-R, systemic acquired resistance. And that's like us taking echinacea or vitamin C or bone broth, right? It boosts our own natural defenses against whatever is attacking us at the moment. So you get that SAR booster. It's a wetting agent because yucca is a saponin. Saponins are basically soapy substances, so they make things stick better. And in addition, because the yucca plant originates in the desert, it has an amazing ability to withstand extreme heat. So when you're moving towards those hot months in our summer period, it's a really good idea to have yucca extract on hand. And if you know a heat wave's coming, start pushing it. Start pushing it like 3 to 5 days before it comes. So integrated pest management is an incredible strategy for using the least toxic technique to manage a pest or pathogen. And there's basically 4 tiers to integrated pest management. We have a biological strategy. This would be things that are alive that can either boost plant response to a pest or pathogen, or they're actually physically eating the problem for you. So these are our predators. These are the beneficial fungi that parasitize other pests. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we look at mapping. Now the chemical category, this is not my language, this is IPM language. And if you're working with Everbloom Consulting, please know that anything and everything I recommend is going to be organic. And I'm going to take that a step further. Anything and everything I recommend is going to be aimed towards regenerative farming. Even if it's organic, you might want to panic because the dose makes the poison. And while it may be safe to apply at 6 a.m., it may not be okay to spray that at 10 a.m. when your pollinator friends are active. So it's really important to look a little deeper into the modes of action. We'll talk about that later. So that third strategy here is called mechanical. And this is physical things we can do to get the bugs off the plant, right? So, all right, I've got aphids on my brassicas, right? So I'm going to take my garden hose and I'm going to actually physically spray them off. Mechanical controls, they're gone. This would also include the heat treatments that I'm going to talk about. We're using heat. It's not alive. It's not chemistry. It's a mechanical tactic. This could also include ingredients like diatomaceous earth. Diatomaceous earth is the fossilized remains of ancient ocean floor sea diatoms. And if you were to look at that under a microscope, it would look like tiny ninja stars. And so there's a bit of a debate in the community whether they're physically slicing and dicing pests or if they are clogging up all of their orifices and suffocating the pest. Either way, it's not a chemical control. It's a very mechanical action that is interrupting the pest's life cycle. So last but never least is the cultural controls. This is what is in our control, right? This is environment. This is light intensity. This is airflow, circulation. This is irrigation practices, fertilization practices. This is what we do to our plants. And when we don't do it right, we have a stressed out plant that becomes more susceptible. So I like to start with biological because I am a big proponent of regenerative farming. But if you don't tackle the cultural symptoms and causes of these issues, you're going to just keep playing the cycle out over and over and over again. So let's go a little bit deeper into cultural controls here. So when it comes to setting up your space, whether it's a large indoor tier 2 rec facility or it's a small home garden, you want to have a quarantine zone. Maybe that's a shelf in your mudroom or in your garage, or a bathroom when you bring new plants into the space. We don't want cross-contamination to occur. It's really important to be mindful of what you're bringing into your space. And that also includes your friends and your pets and whomever may adventure into your zone. So to be quite clear, you want to have sealed walls. You want to have those rooms sealed off from air exchange. So if they're sharing ventilation, you're going to potentially bring things in through that intake fan. Additionally, we want to keep it clean, especially in the indoor garden, right? This is an artificial environment that we've created, and we've taken a tropical plant that has no purpose growing indoors, and we've created this perfect climate for it, right? So these include practices like washing your hands, sterilizing your tools, changing your clothes between different rooms. If you're going from veg to bloom, don't wear the same clothes, especially if there's an active issue. And there's a lot of really inexpensive ways to work around this. You can get a tie-back zip-up suit. You can get a lab coat. You can have a used dryer in your warehouse space and have your staff throw that lab coat in the dryer and run that for at least 20 to 40 minutes. Again, that heat treatment is really, really effective, and we'll talk about that here in a bit. But because it's humans, it's the culture in horticulture, this would be a cultural control. I've also got my bypass pruners pictured here because one of the best ways to avoid creating the perfect bug habitat is pruning and training. So that lower canopy, right, from the soil line to those first few branches, you should have a clear space. I like to have 10 to 25% under canopy clear. I want to be able to see through it and roll a bowling ball through if necessary. Again, breathability. We also want to remove excess foliage. So this is what we all do, right? In September, big leaf, big leaf, big leaf. And just opening that canopy back up again to airflow is so important. And one of the most important focuses here is on environmental, biological, and nutritional health. Again, pests and disease don't usually pose a problem unless the plant is stressed out. Now that's a little different indoors because it's artificial to start with. But I really encourage you to look closer and scope your plant material regularly. Make it one of your SOPs. We do this every week. And at that point, you'll be able to get on top of the problem rather than chase it. So mechanical controls are really fun. So yeah, that's my foot. Right now I'm spraying a Hoya plant off with a small infestation of mealybugs. And this just happens all the time when I'm not looking, right? So this plant got dehydrated. I was busy, I didn't water it. And out of nowhere, the mealybugs emerged. So rather than spending a bunch of money on a pest spray, why not knock 80% of the population off with a garden hose, right? They can't survive the colder nighttime temperatures. So here I am just removing the bug, physically removing the bug. That's a mechanical control. And your garden hose can be your best friend. I even do this for spider mites. Outdoors, this is so easy, right? You want to do this early morning and start at the top. You might want a few reinforcement stakes because we're going to hit it pretty hard with a high pressured spray. So a few extra tie downs can really help prevent limb breakage. So you start spraying that plant down, and before the sun hits, it dries, and you've just reduced the population substantially. And maybe then in the evening you come in with your pest spray, right? I want to spend a little time here on the heat treatments. So generally speaking, when I first introduce this concept to people, they freak out. You want me to cook my plants? And it is pretty intense. And this actually comes straight from the Extension Service. So they have shown that most pests cannot survive temperatures above 117 degrees. Now, most people think, can cannabis? Yeah, it can. If and only if you have certain protocols in place, because this can go totally wrong if you're not careful. So if you have that quarantine zone set up, I would encourage you to heat that space. And actually, this is going to save you money. So I'm going to have you turn your air conditioner off. I'm going to have you turn your exhaust fans off. You'll probably need to keep your lights on if it's an indoor garden. You'll want to raise those up to the ceiling and reduce the intensity, but we need that heat to generate and build up in the space. And most folks do need to bring in a propane heater. You do need to be very, very careful when you are running propane tanks in a high heat environment. So please check with your gas manufacturer. You can run a lead line to the tank through a hole outside, so the actual tank is not in the space. Very, very, very important. So once you get that 117-degree zone, you want to hold it there. So for very, very small plants in a very, very small space, that could be 30, 40 minutes. If it's a tier 2 rec grow, it's probably going to be 2 to 4 hours that you're cooking the plants. And the most important thing is that the root ball stays moist and wet. So what I like to do is come in the day before or the morning before and fully hydrate those root balls, right? So make sure you're getting runoff out the bottom, and make sure that's runoff after the entire media has been saturated, not I'm in a plastic pot and I'm dry and I just shot down the sides. You want to water low and slow, so if you have a row, start at 1, puddle it up, go to the end, start at number 1 again, and continue that until you get a good 20% runoff out the bottom of the container. That's really important. If at any point during this heat treatment that soil dries out, that's when roots die and that's when plants suffer. So that's a really, really big deal. So the heat treatments are so effective, and it's actually a place I generally start with the IPM, and we'll look at that when we start mapping it out. Now you can also create a dunking station. This is a little tough to scale up. I'm still working with some vendors to figure out how to make this realistic for the large scale. But basically, you've got a bucket, you heat it up to 117 degrees. You invert the plant, the entire canopy, the stem, not the root ball. Please don't cook the root ball. And you can stage that on bamboo stakes, set your timer for 5 minutes, and you can cook all eggs, larvae, and adult pests right there in that bucket. Hot water, hot air, these are really inexpensive options. It can be virtually impossible outdoors. So I like to start this early season, right? So all new arrivals should get dunked in the hot water tank. Important to note, make sure you have a thermometer that you trust. Some thermometers on the market have a 7 to 10 degree variance. So if I tell you to cook them at 117 and you hit 127, you're going to be very mad at Erica. So make sure that you have an infrared thermometer, something with a 2 to 3 degree variance, and then stay at 117. The plants can take it up to 120, but I say 117 because of that variance on your thermometers there. And again, make sure you have a good sprayer. If it's not like realistic to do a full broadcast spray and hit every square inch of the plant, your treatments won't be successful. So make sure you have the right tools. And again, use that garden hose. If you have like a staging area prior to entering your space, hose them down. Put a towel or saran wrap over the soil surface. Start at the top and just spray from top to bottom. And you will reduce the population substantially, so you have a much easier pest management plan at that point. Just to give you a couple other tricks for mechanical controls, do y'all remember Tanglefoot? It's that very, very sticky substance. You can paint it on the perimeter of pots. You can put it on the base of the stems. And for large scale applications, it actually comes in a caulking tube, so you can go around the perimeter of your pots or your entire space. If you want to economize that a little bit, just look for something sticky, right? Beeswax, petroleum jelly, chapstick. I've even heard of people using chapstick, and just drawing a line at the base of the stalk. So fortunately, micromites can't fly. That's like the one thing we have going for us. They have to crawl, although in a well-circulated indoor environment, there is some speculation that they can surf wind currents. There's some really great pictures online of broadmites hitchhiking on the legs of fungus gnats entering your space. So it's pretty real. We've got quite an opponent we're up against. So let's briefly talk about chemical controls. I've got a few images here listed, and please note, none of these are on the ODA guide list. These would be for home growers only. But I did want to give you some ingredient ideas, right? So we've got copper or sulfur. This is a chemical that is created from a bacteria known as spinosad. Heavy oils, dormant oil, pesticidal oils, and then insect frass. This is an interesting one. It actually, it's crushed up bugs that have been farmed, and there's a little bit of their bedding, sawdust as well. And it's basically like sending a graveyard into your garden, and other bugs smell that. They smell death and they flee. So these are all really interesting methods of using a chemical control. But again, you really need to go with that Oregon Department of Agriculture guide list and talk to a consultant about which are going to be most effective for your garden and for your particular pest that you're dealing with. Now, these are our besties, the biological controls. I love these guys. This little bug pictured here is Amblyceus swirsky. The Swirsky mite predator has been very effective on russet mites, broad mites, and it's also a thrip predator as well. So I like to save many birds with one net whenever possible. So by getting this one pest, you are protecting, or excuse me, predator, you are protecting yourself against multiple pests. And a couple of years ago, we started seeing what we call myco-insecticides hit the scene. These are some of the genus fungi that are actually doing a really good job. So basically, these fungus get inoculated on your leaf surface or flower surface, and they colonize and parasitize on the bug itself, mummifying it and extracting all of its juices. So it's really kind of amazing. I mean, I guess the word is biological warfare, right? And it's just a way to implement a biological control. But I think it's important to remember that a lot of these are indiscriminate, so they can hurt your beneficials. So these don't necessarily play well together. The predatory mites are wonderful. Now you have to be very strategic on how and when you release them. So if you have 10,000 russet mites and you send in 1,000 Swirsky mites, you've already lost, right? You have to tip the scales on the predator to pest ratio. This is a long list of many of the predator mites available out there on the market, and I see value in each. A lot of folks have been combining the Andersoni mite with the cucumerous mite, and this just gives us more broad spectrum control. So I've mentioned a number of different strategies that we can use. Now, when it comes to those chemical controls, we need to understand this concept, mode of action. How is the pesticide working to kill the pest? So this isn't something you're going to necessarily find on the label. You may have to dig a little deeper. Now, some of them do. I know some of the azadirachtin-based products, which we have to be careful of using on the ODA list right now, are labeled as anti-fetans. So I think marketing is starting to catch up with Integrated Pest Management, which is really exciting. So suffocant, obviously, that's going to be something like a heavy oil that penetrates the orifices of the pest and prevents them from breathing. Repellents are really great too, because this is generally terpene based, so you get to use a lot of essential oils in your chemical controls. And basically they smell it and they make a U-turn. I really like neem seed meal for a repellent. I have top dressed the perimeter of my beds with neem seed meal. And in mid to late summer, when I start to see those white moths fly about, they'll catch a whiff of it and they'll make a detour. Neem is a very effective anti-ovipositor, which means it prevents egg laying in adults looking to reproduce. You've got nerve toxins. These are generally the really scary ones that pose a huge risk to human health, aquatic life, and our environment at large. These ones kind of scare me. And what we found is, generally speaking, this is the mode of action pests build resistance to the quickest. Remember pyrethrins, also red flagged on the ODA guide list? There's another catch-22 for you. Yeah, the nervous system is very adaptable to environmental stimulus, right? So if you get pummeled with pyrethrins for several generations, the pest can actually develop a resistance to it. And we've seen that happen within one generation. So what I'm getting at here is we need to rotate our modes of action, right? We have desiccants. These would be enzymes, citric acid, different products that this is kind of a mechanical overlay with chemical controls. They physically degrade the pest, and they can be very effective as well. And generally speaking, they're a little less likely to build a resistance, but we still believe that you have to be careful with the rotations. The mycoinsecticides I mentioned earlier, those would be parasitic. If you're trying to target something in the soil, predatory nematodes are fantastic for that. So those are some really important terms to start to understand, because I work with a lot of wonderful farmers who want to use IPM and they're just using one strategy, one mode of action. That's not IPM. So when it comes to mapping out micromite, integrated pest management, we're going to use those 4 strategies. We're always going to use all 4. This is a long-term plan, right? It's not just we're going to spray this one product on Tuesday and then we're going to spray it again the next Tuesday. We need to have a long-term vision and strategy to get on top of these pests. This is a really nasty picture here I took. This is a russet mite infestation. This is a carryover infestation. So this client has been dealing with this problem for a year, and I've been working really closely to fill in the gaps in their integrated pest management program to make sure we're actually rotating out those modes of action, because it's my belief that the pest is resistant. So a typical IPM strategy for micromites could and should, if you can, start with that heat treatment. It's not going to cost you anything, and again, it'll actually save you on your electricity bill that month. So again, remember that state extension service recommendation is to hit 117 to 120 degrees. I suggest 117 because of that thermometer variance. And if you have no plants in the room, if you just cut down and you've got everything cleared out, this is when we really want to cook things. So if you can clear that space out, I'm going to suggest you hit 140. You'll also catch a lot of mold spores in that temperature range too. Life can't sustain when environments get that hot. So again, that is only for an empty room, and you can cook that room for 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, whatever your budget allows. But this can make a tremendous difference. So we've got some mechanical options. Depending on the scale of this garden, we might use the dunking station as well. That's a little bit more intensive because you have to have a heating element that maintains that temperature throughout the dunk. And that's typically a 5 to 10 minute dunk, depending on the size of the plant. I have had one client set up a 55-gallon drum with a heating element and invert a 3-month-old mature mother plant and had incredible success. So there's a lot of great inexpensive ways that we can tap into IPM to better our gardens and farms. Now, again, this is Everbloom. We're talking chemical organic treatments. This is not on the ODA guide list. This is an old farmer trick. So aspirin contains really high levels of salicylic acid, and salicylic acid also activates SAR. Now, you don't want to overuse this. Generally speaking, this is not plant-derived. It's not salicylic acid from willow bark, unless you're that amazing and you're wildcrafting your own. You just want to be mindful not to overdo it. I like to equate this to penicillin. Save it as the silver bullet when you have a really serious issue. And by artificially stimulating SAR, you can rob the plant of its own biointelligence, right? Its own innate understanding of I'm under attack and I need to beef up my response. So definitely use that with caution. And that's why I would steer you more towards something like yucca extract or willow extract. We've also had a lot of great feedback on essential oils. Just be mindful that essential oils are not necessarily pollinator friendly. Things like peppermint oil and cinnamon oil and clove oil. These are really intense and they can be caustic. I love to use essential oils, but I give my cinnamon oil to some of my friends and they get a dermatitic reaction when they apply it. So remember that dose makes the poison no matter what the substance is. But we have found some really good response from using those essential oil products. Additionally, in that chemical category, enzymes, remember that desiccating mode of action, heavy dormant oils, suffocants, and then paraffin wax. Interestingly, I had one client spray paraffin wax on his clones and had a really good knockback. And their idea there was they create a physical barrier, and the micromites style, basically their tongue that they're sucking the juices of your plant out of, they couldn't penetrate it. So the only downside there is, I don't know if stomata, the little mouths that breathe on the undersides of the leaves, could handle that for very long. So you might want to do that and then do a series of leaf washes afterwards. And then again, we've discussed those mycoinsecticides. If anyone's ever seen Planet Earth, the cordyceps fungus that parasitizes ants and then fruits a mushroom body out its head and then sporulates, reproducing and turning that cycle over and over again. Now, in outdoor environments, these are unlikely to reproduce on their own. They need very high humidity. And most manufacturers of these products will say to initially introduce them to a space, you want 60 to 70% humidity. Now, once they've sporulated and they've started to colonize, they're fine at lower humidities, but that can be tricky if you're also battling powdery mildew. So I generally recommend we keep humidity at 40% in the indoor garden. So just be mindful of that need. And of course, our wonderful buddies down here, the predator mites. They just do a wonderful job. Now, I list them last because I want them to have their best bet, and they don't play well with the other tactics. So this is an example of my integrated pest management calendar mapping for clients. So this is a root aphid integrated pest management program. And this is really easy to download a calendar and just plug and play as you go. Again, documentation is key. We're all learning together. And if we have record, we can share and replicate the successes. So I generally start with a list of vital signs, right? What's the temperature in the indoor-outdoor garden? What's the humidity? What's the light intensity? What specific light instruments are they using? In addition, we want to know where the plant is at in its life cycle. So in this garden, it was the first week of flower. Ouch. They're in 7-gallon plastic pots in a custom soil blend. So this gives us some cultural background information. And then we've got our 4 categories here. And I like to start with what is on your shelf. I don't want to send you straight to the store. What do you have on hand that we can use, right? And then I'll start plugging those in to their strategies and modes of action so we can start rotating those. And that's what I want to stress the most today. If you're just using chemical sprays, but one week you're using sulfur, and one week you're using an enzyme, and one week you're using pyrethrins, and one week you're using azadirachtin, these are different modes of action, but it's all a chemical control. And we're missing the bigger picture of what we can do. You know, when we're managing a pest, we often forget to feed. Sometimes irrigation tends to fall behind. So don't forget those basic core principles of keeping your plant happy and healthy. Because we're all in this together, right? And our goal at the end of the day is to produce high quality medicine for our community and to protect our environment and protect the organisms that live in the environment and protect our children and each other from exposure. And it's terrifying to me, the risk potential, right? This is an exploding industry all over the nation. And of course, we have established farmers in agriculture here in Oregon, but this really puts pressure on the system. And so if we don't make sustainable choices and we don't set intentions for success and outcomes, we could really be in hot water here soon. And I know for all of us, the goal is to have clean, healthy, pest and disease-free local genetics. And I hate to say it, but if you have a nasty russet mite infestation, you didn't grow medicine. You grew a bunch of green biomass that is going to test low on your cannabinoid potency report and won't have the terpene profiles and certainly won't yield what you were hoping for. So let's all get on the same page because we need clean medicine for the people. I also like to mention and really emphasize the resistance factor. So the idea that bugs can build resistance to the things we spray on them, that's real. The documentation throughout the scientific community is established. We have to prevent that. I really like this image here by Tomo Halloran. It just really depicts the intention and even the metaphor we use, right? I come across this all the time. We use these military metaphors, right? Set up your perimeter defense lines and wage war, and what tools do you have in your arsenal? And the way we talk about things affects the way we think about things. And so it's really important to step back and set a goal, set an intention, and really make sure that we take this opportunity. Oregon has the chance to be a national leader for regenerative farming around cannabis. And I'm just so excited to be a part of that and help shape and nurture us in that direction. And I know that there's the want and there's the will. And with data emerging and wonderful labs at our disposal, we have the way. And lastly, this is kind of an Erica theory, but we do know that, for instance, the tomato russet mite looks morphologically similar to the hemp russet mite. What no entomologist in our state has yet been able to confirm for me is how morphologically different are they? Are they genetically dissimilar, right? That's generally what warrants a species category out of a genus. So we do know that the russet mites can attack the Solanaceae family, tomatoes and peppers. They attack brassicas, our broccoli and cauliflower. There's been some evidence that they're on the Rosaceae family. So I know that there's russet mites on apple trees, but we have a lot of wild native roses, and I'm just worried that they could potentially overwinter. So this is a really big deal. And likewise, the Compositaceae family here. So those would be your thistles. Canadian thistle has definitely been talked about as an overwintering plant for the russet mite in our area. So this is about food security too, you guys. Can you imagine if your farm infected the organically certified food farm right down the street and now their apples and tomatoes have this pest? We're all in this together and we share the same air, the same soil, the same water. And I really hope we can all get together and share the same intention so that we really can carry that torch forward and light up the future of the cannabis industry across the nation and show them how it's done. Thank you for your time today. And so much thanks to Lisa and Sam for creating this safe space so we can share this information and grow together.
Wow. I'm just like blown away by how much you know and how many things you've seen and how many things that you've helped different clients resolve, and you're so detail oriented, and I'm very detail oriented, so I appreciated those close-ups very much. And I'm really impressed. Thank you, Erica, so much for your knowledge and expertise in this field.
It's my honor. I've had the privilege of studying under some of the industry's best, and I'm so happy to have a chance and a internet platform to share this with all the good people. So thank you. I can't thank you enough for this opportunity.
Yay. Well, that concludes today's class. Please tune in for more from Erica Winters. We are going to be recording a bunch of different things, so please look out for more classes from Erica and Everbloom